Hello and welcome to Cheers to Fears, where you take horror films and turn them into drinking games. We're your two hosts. I'm Alex.
And I'm Tucker. Today we will be making a drinking game for Hereditary, written and directed by Aster. Hereditary was Aster's debut film, and it was widely praised by critics. He went on to make another great movie, Midsummer. As both of these movies are some of the best modern horror films, it is safe to say that we are very excited to see his upcoming movie, Disappointment Boulevard, set to release later in this year.
Hereditary follows around a family that just lost their grandmother. Annie, the mother of the family, is not that upset as she should be, as she had a rather rocky past with her mother. There seems to be an awkward silence between the family, as Annie's daughter Charlie was very close to her grandmother, unlike everybody else in the family. As tragedy is far from over from the family, they soon learn about how to cope with grief and learn the dark secrets about their grandmother's past.
Right now we have to stop and say that the spoiler-free section of the video will end here. So we really recommend that you go and watch the movie in its entirety before continuing on to watch the rest of this video. To enhance your viewing experience, we will post the drinking rules on screen now if you have yet to watch the movie.
So we mentioned posts, so our first rule obviously is death. You see a death, you take a sip.
Yeah, so this happened 4 times in the movie, and I guess we'll just spoiler alert, we're going through all the deaths here.
Yeah.
So there's Grandma, which it starts off the movie with her death. You don't actually see her death, but you see her dead body, so we counted it.
Yeah.
Then there's Annie, Steve, and Charlie. So besides the Grandma, all the deaths were super effective.
Yeah. So I'll start with the least effective, I think, is Annie's death, just because she was possessed, and obviously it's still pretty damn effective as she was getting...
Yeah.
She was cutting off her own head in front of her son.
Yeah. And I think I gotta disagree with you. Obviously, we're gonna agree on the most effective. Everybody agrees on the most effective.
Yeah.
But I would give this pretty damn close to just as effective because, like, she's just possessed. Obviously, she's not doing it to herself by choice. But she's, like, directly staring at her son and, like, obviously hovering, basically being strung up in the air, and then just not blinking, carving her own neck, and then not only that, like, that image alone is intense, but then it cuts to Peter jumping out of the window, and then it goes and you see him out there on the ground, and then all you hear is like,
it's just like the thud.
Yeah, you hear the thud, and it's like, for me, it's just super impactful, and it hits just about as hard as the other death that we're going to talk about after we cover Steve's death.
Yeah.
To me, this one was the least effective.
So I think Steve's death was actually more effective, and this is why. In Steve's death, you have Annie who's expecting to die. She throws the book in her fireplace, and it's not her that goes up in flames. Her husband goes up in flames, and you just see the horrified look on her face to realize that she's killed her own husband. Yeah. And then right after that, you see like the static and just blank stare. I feel like it's quite a bit more effective. Her face says everything.
Obviously, there's no ineffective deaths. Every one of them are effective. But for me, it just hit harder with Annie's death rather than Steve's. But all of them did still hit hard.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of nitpicking, I guess, for determining which one you like more, I guess. But obviously, we got the most effective one being Charlie, and it's the scene that everyone talks about because it comes out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Like, there's the foreshadowing of it. You see the post, but just when it happens, her having that allergy to the nuts, it's already a very tense situation, and then she's going out the window for fresh air, trying to breathe, and then all of a sudden he swerves to avoid the roadkill, Peter does, and just bam, head against the post, gets beheaded, and then a few minutes later in the movie it cuts to her head, like when it's daylight, just all covered in ants and shit, and it was altogether very effective.
Yeah.
Anyways, after all that being said, let's finally move on to rule number 2, which is screams, cries, and yells. This happened 23 times in the movie.
Oh, no, I can't. I just want to die.
Yep, I think it was as much as our last movie, but this is a fairly emotional movie.
Yeah.
So obviously there was a lot of crying. Grief is kind of the highlight of the movie, so it was emotional. Obviously there's going to be a lot of crying.
I'd say there's more crying than any other. Like, there's more crying than screams or yells, I'd say.
Moving on to the next rule is if you see this symbol of payment, you take a sip, and this came to a total of 10.
Yeah, it's not seen a whole lot, but it obviously is relevant to the plot, especially in the end once you discover what's going on with the grandma and, you know, the cult and whatever is going on. But honestly, it's pretty easy to miss because you're not looking for it, especially on your first time watching it.
Yeah, you're not looking for it on your first view of the movie.
Yeah.
So in saying that, this rule kind of makes you look for it a little bit more.
Yeah, exactly. And like you find it in kind of obscure places, like Annie's looking through the grandma's box of stuff and you come across Charlie's doormat and it has the symbol on that mat.
Yeah.
And like you would miss that for sure without me. Well, not for sure, but you would miss it on your first watch around probably without this rule.
Yeah.
Moving on to rule number 4, it's whenever you see anything artistic of Charlie's. This happens 9 times in the movie.
Yeah. Examples of this is obviously her figurines with the bird head is one great example.
The bird head, yeah.
The bird head. The other one is obviously the drawings of, I guess you could say Peter.
Peter,
because
you see other drawings
you see other
throughout
drawings.
too, but Peter near the end, or closer to the end. But yeah, I think she gets this artistic side from her mom because you see all of the dioramas and stuff that her mom is making throughout the movie, and yeah, like clearly they're both very artistic, so she probably gets it from her mom, inspired by a bit.
Let's move on to the next rule, which is whenever you hear the clicking sound. And we included each individual time that you hear it. This came to a total of 22 times.
And if she ever was mistaken, well, that was your opinion, and you were...
Now let's move on to rule number 6. It's whenever you see a diorama. This happens 17 times in the movie.
Obviously, we talked about this a little bit. This is where Charlie gets her artistic abilities from, which is her mother.
Oh yeah. And also about the dioramas, like, I think production did super cool job and very, very good, like, effective job on setting up those dioramas, because, like, it's actual rooms of their house in a lot of cases, and it'll zoom in on the diorama slowly, and then it'll basically zoom into the real room without, like, an actual... You don't see a jump or a cut in any way. It's just a very smooth transition, and it's done super well. And I thought it was very interesting and very pleasing to see visually.
Oh yeah. The next rule we have is whenever you see the treehouse, you take a sip. And this came to a total of 9 sips.
Yeah, and there's something kind of very sinister about the treehouse, which obviously you learn about in the end. But it's kind of weird because we see it a good handful of times throughout the movie, and you don't think too much of it, but like at night when someone's sleeping in there, they have the heaters on and it's just a red glow coming from it, so you know something's gonna come out of it, but you just don't know what to expect. And then finally once you learn, it's pretty messed up.
Yeah.
Moving on to rule number 8, it's whenever you see a dead character, and this happened 12 times in the movie.
I'm a medium, okay? I was seeing apparitions earlier and I just shook them off and I shouldn't have.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes it's just the shadows, like kind of the thought of people being there, and it does kind of a good job, especially like sound-wise, where it like starts to get louder, and then like a light flickers on and then stops.
Yeah, and I think a lot of those instances are even like dreams, kind of, because like Peter will be dreaming and then he'll see Charlie in the corner of his room, for example, and then he kind of snaps out of it and wakes up and she's obviously not there. So like it's stuff like that where you see the dead character, and sometimes it's actually just a dead character, like the grandma in the funeral, for example, or at the end you see all these dead bodies in the treehouse. But yeah, for the most part I think it is kind of just shadows or ghostly figures.
Let's move on to the next rule though, which is whenever a dead person is talked about. This happens 17 times in the movie.
My name's Annie. My mom died a week ago, so I'm just here for trying it. I have a lot of resistance to things like this.
Yeah, it happens quite a bit because, you know, they're talking about the mother that died, or like the grandmother that died, and then they're talking about Charlie who died, and like they're talking about like Joan, for example, the medium or whatever you want to call her, the one that's kind of in cahoots with the grandma who passed away. Yeah. She talks about how her grandchild died along with her son. Yeah. There's just a lot of people talked about dying in this movie. Yeah. Anyways, let's move on to the final rule of this drinking game. It's whenever you see a shimmering light, and it only happens 6 times, but it's kind of key to the plot.
Yeah. Why it's key to the plot is because it's Payman.
Yeah, exactly.
If you didn't notice, but it's not just some light, but yeah, it is the demon trying to just go around from person to person.
Yeah, it's basically taking over their soul or their body, I guess you would say.
Yeah. Now let's move on to the totals for this movie. The total number of sips came to 129, which is the equivalent of drinking 4.5 standard 12-ounce cans based on our 30 sip per can scale.
Yeah, the drinking was pretty well paced throughout. Like, there's quite a few drinks, but it wasn't all happening at once. There were some instances where a lot of rules were happening at the same time, and it can take you away from the movie, especially if it's your first time watching it and really invested in the story. So just be wary of that. But for the most part, it's pretty well paced throughout, and I'd say for the most part, it doesn't take you out of the movie, but there are some instances where it could.
Yeah.
So now let's move on to talking about the movie itself and what we thought of it, I guess, and just how it was done. Overall, this movie was done extremely well and super effective in almost every aspect. Like, it comes pretty damn close to perfect, honestly.
Yeah, there was a lot of things that it did right. For instance, like even small things such as like the sound design.
Oh yeah.
The silence of the movie was phenomenal, and I feel like the movie was very constant, but it knew when to like shut up pretty much.
Yeah, and slow down and let it linger.
Yeah. So I know one example is with a rule whenever we see a dead person, which Annie sees her mom or thinks she sees her mom, and then immediately turns on the lights and it's nothing, so the sound just stops. So it like scares you a little bit and then just lights on like nothing. It's like, oh my god, did I just see that or what happened? And on top of that, just the rest of the movie, the creepy atmosphere of the soundtrack in general, it hit pretty hard.
Oh yeah, definitely. And like, not only the sound design, but just the emotions that were in this movie. Like, they didn't rely on cheap gimmicks. Like, for example, there's so many movies that rely on alcoholism to show a person grieving or like depressed or something, but this movie just uses raw emotions, and like the actors do a superb job at expressing those emotions and make you feel what they're feeling, basically.
Oh yeah, obviously the acting's done very well in this movie. Alex Wolff playing Peter did a phenomenal job, as he's kind of showed up in the horror industry as of recently.
Yeah,
and
like you get like the scene that sticks out to me is where he's in his classroom and then he raises his hand, but it's all like, you know, disfigured in a way, and then all of a sudden he just starts banging his head on the desk. That scene sticks out to me when thinking about his acting in this movie.
The way that he slips back like so far from his desk, it's just like, how do you do that? But you've seen the entire scene go down.
And then you have Steve, which is the father of Peter, obviously played by Gabriel Byrne. He does a good job too. Like, he's not a major character, he's kind of just there to try and keep the family together and basically try and just, you know, keep them, just to support them, basically. There is some times where he kind of gets emotional, and there are some lines of dialogue I felt were a little bit unrealistic that he had, but for the most part, he does a good job fulfilling his role, at least.
Obviously, the main actor here in this movie is Toni Collette. She got infamously snubbed of an Oscar, and she wasn't even nominated for Best Actress.
But she should have, at the very least, been nominated, because she does a phenomenal job in this role. Like, there's not one time where I don't believe what she's going through. Like, I don't believe that she's just acting. It feels real, you know? Because like, there's so many scenes where she's just hysterical. You see it in her face, and then even the scenes where she's like when Steve's death occurs. We mentioned how she's like hysterically crying, screaming, and then all of a sudden
just like blank out of it.
And the way she transitions so quickly to that, it's just phenomenal. Like, that's all I can say, really.
No, she does a very good job in every way, from actions to just facial expressions to words. Pronunciation, everything was done very well by her.
And even like the scenes where her and Peter are arguing, both of them do a really great job in those scenes. Like, they'll be kind of ignoring each other, and like Peter will kind of glare at her in a way to make it known that he is upset with her, like whatever, they're not getting along clearly. And then they just get into a full-on screaming fit at the dinner table where they're blaming each other, and they're both not taking responsibility for the actions that they did. Like, the mom, Annie, forcing Charlie to go to this barbecue, which was a party. So that she's not accepting her responsibility with that. And then Peter not accepting his responsibility when he literally killed his sister on that post. And just the scenes where they're arguing back and forth are just intense.
And obviously you mentioned, like, why did Charlie want to go to that party? I feel like that scene was just set up so perfectly. With the nut allergy, and they mentioned it a little bit. There was also the post, which was a clever direction to show with the post. It had the symbol, like, right on it. It just kind of stood on it for, like, a little bit too long. So you know,
when they're driving past it. Yeah.
Sorry, when they're driving past it. So you know, oh, this is going to be important. Yeah. And you didn't expect what to happen with the post. The sister to be absolutely fucking beheaded.
Yeah, the way that the car drove past, like it's panning with the car. You just see the landscape and the scenery and stuff. And all of a sudden the post gets in the frame, it just stops.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, why? That's weird.
Yeah,
First time watching it, it's a weird choice, but obviously it makes sense.
Yeah, fast forward 10 minutes and you know why they stopped in the post.
Yeah.
So Tucker, overall, what were your thoughts on the film?
Obviously, it was a near perfect film, like we said at the top. I can't think of many problems with the movie. There may have been a couple lines of dialogue, but that's just me nitpicking. Like, Toni Collette does an amazing job. Peter, Alex Wolff plays him. He does an amazing job. All the actors do a great job. And, like, the emotion in the movie is just over the top. And honestly, it's not a movie that I can go and watch all the time because it's so heavy. And you got to really be in the right mood to watch it. But yeah, it's a super effective movie, and there's not much I can say about it negatively. Nothing really.
Yeah, I feel like it does kind of perfect in the horror genre, especially building that suspense and atmosphere. You see these dead people in kind of the corner of your eye, and you look back and they're not there, along with obviously the beheading scene, and then it kind of all escalates into Toni Collette being possessed and wanting to kill her son, just like banging on the top of the attic roof to get to him.
Yeah.
It's a lot. It's an amazing work of art, I would say. And I was very surprised that this was a first movie coming from somebody.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So even though this is a near perfect film, there are still some dumb decisions made from characters, which leads us to our award ceremony, where we award one not so lucky nominee the Darwin Award. This award goes out to the character who made a stupid decision that resulted in them getting killed, somebody else getting killed, or simply resulting in something bad happening. This award can also be given to a character who is just plain dumb. Here are the nominees.
Today's first nominee is Annie for making Charlie go to the party with Peter, even though there was a strong indication that there would be alcohol at the party, and forcing Peter to bring along his underage little sister is just asking for trouble.
The other nominee we have today is Peter for getting high at a house party and leaving his little sister on her own. Furthermore, Peter decided to drive a vehicle while high as opposed to calling an ambulance or attempting to find a sober person to drive him and his sister to the hospital instead.
And today's winner is Peter. You should never drink and drive while under the influence by any sort of alcohol or drugs. Yes, we're a channel that promotes drinking games, but understand that you must always do so in a safe environment and always make sure you have a safe ride home or a comfy place to crash for the night if you do plan on drinking.
And with all that being said, we hope you enjoyed our look into Hereditary. If you end up playing the game alongside the movie, or if you have any other feedback or suggestions, let us know in the comments below. Also let us know in the comments where this stands in terms of other modern horror movies.
Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the next week's episode, where we're going to be making a drinking game for the movie that we probably criticize the most on this channel, The Blair Witch Project. If you want to check out our drinking game on Midsummer, click on the box in the top right, or if you want to see a playlist of all the drinking games and horror movies we review, click on the box below it. Thanks for tuning in, and this is us saying, cheers to fears.